When I first met Ben, I was 22 and everything about our relationship felt effortless. We clicked from the very beginning, our chemistry undeniable. There was a spark, something that made every moment together feel special. We shared dreams, laughter, and passion in ways that seemed rare for people our age. Our friends admired us, calling us the perfect couple. I truly believed we had it all. But as the years went on, that spark started to flicker and fade, and I didn't know how to stop it. It wasn't one big moment that shifted things. It was the gradual wear and tear of routine. The late-night talks turned into long silences. The touch that once felt electric now felt mechanical. Our intimacy, once so natural, became something I had to force myself to do. And it wasn't just physical. I found myself growing emotionally distant from Ben, retreating into my own world where I could escape the disconnection I felt between us. At first, I convinced myself that this was just a phase, something we could work through. We were both busy with our careers, and life had its inevitable stresses. I kept thinking that maybe if I tried harder, if I made more effort to connect, things would go back to how they were. I'd initiate small conversations, pretend to laugh at his jokes, but deep down I knew something had shifted. It wasn't that I didn't love him anymore. I still cared for him, but the romantic attraction was gone. That was the hardest part for me to admit, even to myself. Ben, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice the changes. He still saw me as the woman he married, the woman who could make him laugh, the woman who was there for him through thick and thin. He would kiss me goodnight and tell me he loved me, and I would smile, say it back, and feel this knot in my stomach because I wasn't sure if I meant it. But I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth, not then, not when things were so delicate. The thought of hurting him, of breaking the life we had built together, terrified me. Instead, I did what I thought was the only option. I pretended. I faked my emotions, pretending to be interested when he spoke about his day, pretending to be happy when we went out for dinner or shared quiet moments at home. I tried to make it work, tried to convince myself that I could be content in a relationship that no longer made me feel alive. I thought maybe it would pass, that maybe one day I'd wake up and things would be as they once were. But deep down I knew that wasn't the case. As time passed, I grew more resentful of myself for pretending, for lying. The guilt of living a life that didn't feel real weighed on me. But the fear of facing the truth kept me silent. I had convinced myself that the longer I kept up the facade, the less likely Ben would suspect anything. I believed that maybe he didn't see the cracks because he didn't want to, or maybe he was pretending to. But even with all the pretending, I knew I was only delaying the inevitable. I wasn't being true to myself, and I wasn't being fair to Ben. And that's when I realized something terrifying. I was stuck. Stuck in a life that wasn't mine. Stuck in a marriage that had lost its spark, but where I had no idea how to light it again. And so I kept pretending until I couldn't anymore. It was a Thursday evening just like any other. Ben and I had just finished dinner, the same routine we followed for years, nothing special. We didn't even talk much, and I couldn't help but notice how quiet the house felt. The silence between us had grown so thick. I sometimes wondered if it would swallow us whole. But that night something in me snapped. I don't know what triggered it. Maybe it was the exhaustion of pretending, or the heavy weight of everything I had been hiding, but the words came out before I could stop them. I only faked attraction for years. I could feel the words hang in the air, sharp and raw. The second they left my mouth, my heart sank. The instant regret flooded in. What had I just done? Why did I say that? I wanted to take it back, to swallow those words and erase them from existence. But it was too late. The damage was done. I could see the shock in Ben's face as he froze, his fork hanging in midair, his eyes wide with disbelief. He didn't say anything at first, and for a moment, the room was suffocatingly quiet. I could hear the sound of my heartbeat thudding in my ears. "What did you say?" he asked finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. His voice trembled slightly, and I could feel the anger beginning to build in him. I had never seen him look so confused, so hurt. I opened my mouth to apologize, to explain that I hadn't meant it, but the words wouldn't come out. How could I explain that I had been hiding this for so long, that I had never intended for him to find out? How could I take back the truth I had just exposed? "Claire," he said, his voice a little sharper now, "why didn't you tell me before?" I could see the hurt in his eyes, the deep, gut-wrenching pain that came from realizing that the woman he loved, the woman he trusted, had been lying to him for so long. I could feel the anger rising in him, But what terrified me the most was the look of disbelief. He simply couldn't process it. He stared at me, waiting for an explanation, but there was none that could make it better. No excuse I could offer could undo the years of silence, the years of pretending. I didn't know how to tell you, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how to say it without hurting you. He shook his head, clearly struggling to understand. But how could you keep something like that from me? How could you pretend all this time? I could hear the pain in his words, the sense of betrayal seeping through every syllable. I wanted to tell him that I had been afraid of losing him, afraid of the life we built together falling apart. I wanted to explain that I had convinced myself it was better to live a lie than to shatter everything we had. But the truth was I didn't have any answers and I wasn't sure I could fix it. Do you even love me? He asked, his voice cracking as if the question physically hurt him. The weight of his question hung in the air, and for a moment I couldn't speak. Could I say I still loved him? Could I lie about that too? The reality was that I didn't know. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. My feelings for him were complicated, clouded by guilt, resentment, and fear. I don't know, I whispered, and that was the hardest thing I had ever said. Ben sat there silent. His face was a mixture of hurt and anger, and I couldn't bear to look at him. I felt the distance between us grow wider with every passing second. I had shattered something irreparably, and now there was no going back. The days following my confession were nothing short of suffocating. Ben and I barely spoke, and when we did, the words felt hollow, like they were coming from a place of complete exhaustion rather than genuine connection. Our home, once filled with the sounds of laughter and casual conversations, now seemed eerily quiet. It was as though the walls themselves had absorbed the tension, and no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't seem to escape it. Ben had retreated into himself, and I could see it in his eyes every time he looked at me. There was no anger, at least not in the way I had expected. Instead, there was this quiet, deep sorrow. He was grieving something I had taken from him without even realizing it. Our bond, our love. Everything he thought we shared was suddenly broken, and I couldn't fix it. I couldn't pretend anymore. The guilt was unbearable. Every time I saw him sitting alone, his head buried in his hands, or when he stared out of the window lost in thought, I wanted to scream at myself for causing this pain. What had I done? How had I allowed things to go this far without ever being honest with him? But even in my deepest moments of regret, I still couldn't find the words to fix it. I spent my days walking around in a fog. I went through the motions of daily life, but my mind was constantly occupied by thoughts of what I had said and what it meant for our future. I tried to busy myself with work, with anything that could distract me from facing the harsh reality of our situation. But it was no use. Every time I laid my head down to sleep, I was overwhelmed by the thought that our marriage, the life we had built together, might be over. What scared me the most was how unfamiliar I felt in my own skin. I had spent so long pretending to be someone I wasn't, pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't, that now I didn't even know who I was anymore. It was like I had lost myself somewhere in the years of suppressing my own needs and desires. I wondered if Ben had ever suspected the truth. Had he seen the small signs, the moments when I pulled away, the times when I didn't respond the way I used to? Or had he, like me, been living in this uncomfortable comfort of silence, afraid to confront the truth because doing so meant acknowledging that everything we knew would change? I couldn't stop thinking about what he must have been feeling. He had spent years loving me, trusting me, and I had betrayed him in the worst way possible. I knew that our relationship, our marriage, was built on a foundation of lies. And as much as I hated to admit it, I had played a part in creating that foundation. I had chosen the comfort of pretending over the painful honesty that could have saved us both a long time ago. As the days passed, I found myself questioning everything. Was I staying in this marriage out of convenience? Out of fear of being alone? Or did I still love him but was too afraid to acknowledge it? And more importantly, did he still love me after everything I had done? The uncertainty gnawed at me. I knew that whatever happened next, I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending to be something I wasn't, and I couldn't continue to hurt the one person who mattered most to me. Any evening, after days of silence and avoidance, Ben and I found ourselves face to face in the kitchen. The weight of unspoken words hung between us, like a thick fog that neither of us knew how to clear. It had been over a week since I had confessed my secret, And in that time, nothing had been resolved. We had both been stuck in a loop of confusion, regret, and fear. I had spent so many nights lying awake, wondering if I could somehow undo the damage, but deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. We were standing by the counter, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the quiet. Ben was stirring a cup of coffee, and I could see his mind was elsewhere, lost in thought, as if he were trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't quite fit anymore. I, on the other hand, had reached a point where I couldn't keep pretending any longer. I had to make a choice. We both did. "I don't know how we got here, Claire," Ben said softly, breaking the silence. "I don't understand why you didn't tell me earlier." I could feel the weight of his words settle into the pit of my stomach. He wasn't angry anymore, but the pain in his voice was undeniable. It was the kind of pain that you feel deep in your chest when you've been betrayed by someone you loved with all your heart. The kind of pain that comes from the realization that everything you thought you knew was a lie. "I didn't want to hurt you," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to lose you." Ben didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at me with those eyes that had once been filled with so much love. Now they were clouded with doubt and sadness. I could feel the tears welling up, but I held them back. I had cried too many times already, and I knew crying wouldn't change anything. "Do you still love me?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with an urgency that caught me off guard. The question caught me off guard as well. I hadn't expected him to ask me so directly. For so long I had avoided asking myself that very question. Did I still love him? The answer wasn't easy, and the truth was I didn't have a simple answer. I loved him, but in a different way now. The love I once felt had been buried under years of silence, of pretending, of living a life that wasn't true to who I was. But as I looked at him standing there, broken and vulnerable, I realized something. I hadn't lost all of my feelings for him. They just needed to be uncovered, to be rebuilt from the ground up. "I don't know," I said honestly, my voice shaking. "But I know I can't keep living this lie. I can't keep pretending like nothing's wrong. It's not fair to either of us." Ben's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a glimmer of understanding. "I don't know if we can fix this, Claire," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "But I want to try. I can't just give up on us." I knew then that this was the moment of truth. This was the turning point. I had a choice to make, whether to walk away from everything and start over, or to face the mess I had made, the hurt I had caused, and try to rebuild what we had lost. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew there was no guarantee it would work. But one thing was clear: we couldn't keep pretending. If we were going to move forward, we both had to be honest with ourselves, with each other, and with the love we still had, however small it might have seemed. "Let's try," I whispered, the words barely audible, but they were the most honest words I had spoken in years. And in that moment, I realized that the real work was just beginning. As the days went by, Ben and I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick. We both had scars, his from the betrayal, mine from years of hiding the truth. But there was a shift between us, a subtle yet undeniable change. It wasn't about fixing everything at once. It was about learning to face the truth, to be vulnerable with each other, and to build something new from the broken pieces of our past. We started small. Conversations that used to feel like walking on eggshells began to feel more open, more honest. The walls we had both built up, the ones that kept us from truly connecting, began to crack. I could feel Ben trying, and I was trying too. Every night after dinner, we'd talk about our day. But this time, we didn't just talk about the surface things. We talked about our fears, our regrets, and our hopes. Slowly, it felt like we were starting over, not from scratch, but from a place of mutual understanding and acceptance. There were moments of awkwardness, moments when the silence between us would stretch out uncomfortably. But with each passing day, those moments became fewer. Ben was patient with me, more patient than I ever thought he could be, and I tried to be patient with him. I learned that love isn't just about the big gestures or the perfect moments. It's about showing up, day after day, and being willing to face the difficult truths, even when they hurt. We also sought help. After weeks of trying to work things out on our own, we decided to go to therapy. It was uncomfortable at first. Talking to a stranger about our most private issues felt like exposing ourselves to a world of judgment. But slowly it helped. It helped us see our relationship from a new perspective. We realized that both of us had been carrying burdens, me the weight of my lies and Ben, the weight of his unspoken doubts and fears. Therapy didn't solve everything, but it gave us the tools we needed to communicate better, to understand each other on a deeper level. One afternoon, months after that fateful night when I confessed, Ben and I were sitting together on the couch. The house felt different now, warmer, quieter, more peaceful. We had gone through the storm, and while the scars were still there, they no longer defined us. We had learned to love each other again, not just for who we used to be, but for who we were now. "Claire," Ben said softly, his voice filled with sincerity, "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were. But I don't think we need to. I think we're building something new. And I want to be a part of that. I want to move forward with you." I smiled, my heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and hope. "Me too," I whispered. "I'm ready to move forward. With you." And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The truth had hurt. It had almost torn us apart. But in the end, it was the only thing that could heal us. It wasn't the easy choice, but it was the right one. We had faced the worst of it together, and now we were stronger because of it. As we sat there side by side, I realized that sometimes the hardest part of love isn't the love itself. It's the honesty, the vulnerability, and the willingness to face the pain. But in that truth, we had found a new beginning. One that was real, raw, and full of hope.